My name is Dr. Andrew Morgan, and I came to Loch Ness in 1978 as a skeptic armed with scientific training and a deep contempt for pseudoscience. I left 6 months later as something else entirely, a witness to intelligence that shouldn't exist, to consciousness that defied every theory I'd been taught, to a mind that looked into mine and showed me how little I truly understood about the nature of awareness itself. I was 34 years old, a biology teacher at a secondary school in Manchester, recently divorced and looking for a project that would distract me from the wreckage of my personal life. When the opportunity arose to spend a summer term teaching at a small school in Fort Augustus while the regular teacher was on medical leave, I jumped at it. Scotland. Mountains. Water. Distance from everything that reminded me of my failures. The Loch Ness Monster wasn't part of the plan. I dismissed it as tourist nonsense, a legend maintained for economic benefit, no more real than leprechauns or fairies. My scientific training had taught me to demand evidence, to reject claims that couldn't be verified, to maintain skepticism in the face of extraordinary assertions. That training failed me completely when I came face to face with something that couldn't exist, yet did. I'm 68 years old now, recording this testimony from my home in Edinburgh, where I've lived quietly since 1979, teaching biology to university students and keeping my secret carefully locked away. But I'm dying, pancreatic cancer, stage 4, perhaps 3 months remaining, and I can't take this knowledge with me. Someone needs to know what I encountered in those waters. Someone needs to understand that the creature isn't what we think it is. It's not a plesiosaur. Not a prehistoric survivor. Not a simple animal following instinct and biological imperatives. It's something else. Something that thinks. Something that knows. Something that looked at me with eyes that held understanding I'd seen only in humans, and perhaps not even in all humans. If you're watching this, if this recording has found you somehow, then prepare yourself for testimony that will challenge everything you believe about consciousness, intelligence, and the boundaries between human and non-human minds. Subscribe to this channel if you're ready to question what separates us from other species. Hit that like button if you believe intelligence takes forms we haven't recognized. Share this with people who understand that awareness isn't exclusive to humanity. Because what I'm about to tell you changed how I see every living thing on this planet. I arrived in Fort Augustus in June 1978, renting a small cottage on the southern shore of the loch with a view across dark water toward the steep hills on the opposite bank. The school was pleasant enough, 30 students ranging from 11 to 16, most from local families who'd lived around the loch for generations. They were bright, curious, and absolutely convinced that the monster was real. "Have you seen it yet, Mr. Morgan?" they'd ask during breaks, their faces earnest and expectant. "There's nothing to see," I'd reply, trying to be gentle but honest. The Loch Ness Monster is a legend. A story. There's no credible evidence of any large unknown animal in these waters. They'd look at me with pity, as if I were the one who didn't understand. As if being educated had made me blind to something obvious. I spent my evenings alone, reading or walking along the shore, watching tourist boats cruise the loch in search of something they'd never find. The water was beautiful in its severity, black and cold and deep, reflecting the moody Scottish sky, holding secrets that were geological rather than biological. I found peace there, in the emptiness and the quiet. Then, 3 weeks into my stay, one of my students approached me after class. A boy named Jamie, 14 years old, serious beyond his years. "Mr. Morgan, my grandfather wants to meet you." "Why?" "He says you don't believe. He says he can show you something that will change your mind." But only if you promise not to tell anyone else. Not the tourists, not the newspapers. Just see it and understand. I should have declined politely. Should have explained that I wasn't interested in local folklore or tourist traps. But there was something in Jamie's face, a seriousness, a weight, that made me curious. "All right," I said. "I'll meet him." Jamie's grandfather was named Alistair MacLeod, 78 years old, a retired fisherman who'd worked Loch Ness for 60 years. He lived in a cottage even smaller than mine, cluttered with fishing gear and nautical charts and photographs spanning decades of life on the water. "So you're the English teacher who doesn't believe," he said when Jamie brought me to his door. "The scientist who thinks we're all fools chasing fairy tales." "I don't think you're fools," I said carefully. "I just think the evidence for a large unknown animal in Loch Ness is insufficient to support the claim." "Evidence," Alistair repeated, the word carrying disdain. "You want photographs? Bones? Something you can measure and catalogue and put in a museum. But what if the creature doesn't want to be measured? What if it's smart enough to avoid your cameras and your nets? Then it would be the most intelligent aquatic animal ever documented. Which seems unlikely. It does. Unless you're making the wrong assumption about what kind of animal it is." He poured tea, strong, bitter, the way fishermen drink it, and sat across from me in a chair that had molded itself to his shape over decades of use. "I've seen it 43 times in 60 years, he said. "Not glimpses. Not maybes. Clear, close sightings where I could see details, where I could watch it move and behave and respond to my presence. And I'll tell you what I learned, it's not an animal. Not in the way you mean. It's something else." "What else could it be?" "Something that thinks. Something that remembers. Something that's been in these waters long enough to develop. I don't know the proper word. Society? Culture? Whatever it is that separates creatures that just survive from creatures that truly live." I wanted to dismiss this as the romantic anthropomorphing of an old man who'd spent too much time alone on the water. But Alistair's eyes were clear, his voice steady. He wasn't delusional or confused. He believed what he was saying with the certainty of someone reporting observable fact. "You want to see it," he said. "I can tell. Part of you is curious despite your training telling you it's impossible. I'm a scientist. Of course I'm curious about claims of unknown species. Then come with me tomorrow morning. 4 a.m. We'll take my boat out to a place where it sometimes feeds. If we're lucky, if it's there, you'll see for yourself. And then you can decide whether your training prepared you for what actually exists in this world." I agreed. How could I not? Even if I expected to see nothing but water and dawn light, even if I was certain this was a waste of time, the opportunity to directly observe what a credible witness believed he'd seen repeatedly, that had scientific value. Or so I told myself. The truth was simpler. I wanted to believe. Wanted there to be something mysterious left in a world that science had explained so thoroughly. Wanted the wonder I'd felt as a child when I'd first read about the Loch Ness Monster, before education had taught me to dismiss such things as impossible. We left the dock at 4 a.m., the world still dark, the loch flat and silent. Alistair's boat was old but well-maintained, a 14-foot wooden vessel with an outboard motor that started on the first pull. He navigated by memory and starlight, heading toward a spot about 2 kilometers from shore where the water was deep and the underwater topography created conditions that attracted fish. "This is where it hunts," he explained, cutting the engine and letting us drift. Not every day. Not on any schedule I can predict. But sometimes. Often enough that I know to watch this area. We sat in silence as dawn approached, the sky lightening gradually from black to grey. I was cold despite my jacket, my breath visible in the morning air. Alistair seemed unbothered, patient in the way of men who'd spent their lives waiting for fish. "There," he said quietly. I looked where he was pointing but saw nothing. Just water, barely rippling in the still air. Watch the surface. 40 meters out. Something's rising. And then I saw it. The water began to bulge upward, smoothly, as if something large was ascending from below. Not breaking the surface yet, just displacing it, creating a dome of water that grew higher as whatever was beneath came closer to the air. My heart was hammering. My scientific training insisted this could be explained, a large fish, perhaps, or a log rising from the depths, or a trick of light and shadow. But something deeper, more instinctive, knew I was about to see something that would challenge everything I thought I understood. The neck broke the surface perhaps 30 meters from our boat. It rose slowly, water streaming off skin that looked almost black in the early morning light. The neck was long, 3 meters at least, and thick, tapering from a body I couldn't yet see to a head that was smaller and more refined than I'd expected. The shape was serpentine but not snake-like. Something else. Something that combined features from multiple species in ways that shouldn't work but somehow did. And then it turned its head toward our boat. Toward us. Toward me. The eyes were what destroyed my skepticism completely. Large, forward-facing, dark and liquid and filled with something I'd never seen in an animal before. Not just awareness, many animals are aware of their surroundings, can track threats and opportunities. This was different. This was recognition. Understanding. The creature wasn't just seeing me. It was seeing me seeing it. It was conscious of being observed, and it was making its own observations in return. Stop here. Right here. This is the moment everything changed. This is when I stopped being a scientist observing a phenomenon and became something else, a participant in a moment of mutual recognition between minds that shouldn't have been able to recognize each other. Subscribe if you want to understand what that recognition meant. Hit that like button if you believe consciousness exists in forms we haven't acknowledged. Because what happened next proved that intelligence isn't measured by technology or language or any of the markers we use to convince ourselves we're special. The creature held my gaze for perhaps 30 seconds. In that time, I felt something I'd never felt before and have never felt since, a sense of being truly seen by something that wasn't human. Not judged, exactly. Not evaluated. Just acknowledged. Understood. Accepted as another conscious being sharing the same moment of existence. Then it made a sound. Low, resonant, felt more than heard. The sound traveled through the water, through the boat, through my body, vibrating in my chest cavity in a way that suggested communication rather than noise. Alistair nodded slowly, as if the creature had said something he understood. "What was that?" I whispered. "Greeting. Recognition. Hard to explain. You feel it more than hear it. It's how they acknowledge you when they've decided you're not a threat. They? There's more than one. Always has been. But we can discuss that later. Watch. It's going to dive now." The creature began to descend, its body becoming visible as it sank, massive, easily 10 meters long, with appendages that might have been flippers or might have been something else. The descent was smooth, controlled, disappearing into the depths without creating any significant disturbance on the surface. And then we were alone again on the empty loch, with nothing but morning light and the memory of eyes that had seen into me as deeply as I'd seen into them. I couldn't go back to teaching that day. Called in sick, spent the morning sitting in my cottage trying to process what I'd witnessed. Every assumption I'd brought to Scotland had been wrong. The creature existed. It was intelligent. And it had chosen to reveal itself to me in a moment of communication I was completely unprepared to understand. Alistair came by in the afternoon, bringing fish for dinner and whiskey for courage. "You're in shock," he said, settling into my single armchair. "Everyone is, the first time. Seeing something that shouldn't exist does that to people." "It's not just that it exists," I said. "It's what it is. Those eyes, Alistair. That sound. That was communication. Deliberate, intentional communication with another intelligent being. They are smart. Smarter than dolphins, maybe smarter than great apes. Hard to measure intelligence in something so different from us. But yes, they think. They remember. They recognize individual humans and respond accordingly." "How long have you known?" "Since I was 12 years old and my father took me out on his boat and showed me what lived in the loch. Same way his father showed him. Same way I showed Jamie last year when he turned 13. It's a tradition in our family, passing down the truth to each generation, teaching them how to respect the creatures, how to keep the secret." "Why keep it secret? If the creature is real, if it's intelligent, shouldn't the world know?" Alistair looked at me with something close to pity. "And what would the world do with that knowledge? Hunt it. Capture it. Put it in an aquarium. Study it until it died from the stress. The only reason it survived this long is because most people don't believe it exists. Belief would be its death sentence. But scientific study could." "Could what?" "Teach us about it. We already know what matters. It's intelligent. It's peaceful. It's been here longer than we have. What else do we need to know?" I wanted to argue. Wanted to insist that knowledge was valuable for its own sake, that understanding the creature's biology and behavior and evolutionary history would benefit science and humanity. But I couldn't quite convince myself. Because I'd seen those eyes, and I understood instinctively that some things are diminished rather than enhanced by being fully known. "What do you want from me?" I asked. "Nothing. I showed you because Jamie asked me to, and because you're a teacher. Teachers should understand what they're teaching about. You lecture those kids about evolution and biology and the diversity of life. How can you do that properly if you don't know about the most remarkable example of life in these waters? You want me to tell them? The students? God, no. Most of them already know. Their families have lived here for generations, have the same traditions mine does. But now you know. Now you can teach with full understanding of how much we don't know, how much mystery still exists in the world despite our best efforts to catalogue and explain everything." I went back to the loch 3 days later. Alone this time, in a small inflatable kayak I'd rented, paddling out to the area where Alistair had taken me. I didn't expect the creature to appear again. I wasn't a local, wasn't part of the tradition, had no right to demand another encounter. But I needed to try. needed to see if what I'd experienced had been real or if isolation and suggestion and the strange light of a Scottish dawn had created something that existed only in my mind. I paddled to the spot Alistair had shown me and stopped, letting the kayak drift while I waited. The loch was calm, the afternoon light turning the water from black to dark blue. Tourist boats passed in the distance, their passengers scanning the surface for something they would never see because they were looking in the wrong way, expecting the wrong thing. I wasn't sure what I was expecting. Another sighting seemed unlikely. But I felt drawn to this place, felt a need to be present in the water where intelligence lived hidden from a world that would destroy it if given the chance. The creature surfaced beside my kayak without warning. One moment I was alone on empty water, the next I was 3 meters from a head that rose from the depths with barely a ripple. I should have been terrified. I was in a small inflatable boat, completely vulnerable, sharing space with something that could have capsized me with a casual movement. But I wasn't afraid, because the eyes that looked at me held no threat. Just curiosity. The same curiosity I felt. Two different forms of consciousness, meeting in the space between species, trying to understand each other across a gulf that language couldn't bridge. The creature made that sound again, the low, resonant thrumming that I felt in my chest. And this time, I understood. Not the specifics, not anything like words or sentences. But the intent. The meaning. It was asking a question. Or offering acknowledgement. Or simply saying, "I see you. Do you see me?" I did the only thing that made sense. I spoke. Out loud, feeling foolish but compelled by the moment to respond as genuinely as I could. "I see you," I said. "I don't understand you. But I see you. And I'm trying to understand." The creature tilted its head slightly, a gesture so human it made my breath catch. Then it moved closer, slowly, until its head was perhaps a meter from my kayak. Close enough that I could see the texture of its skin, the patterns like old scars crossing its neck, the way its eyes tracked my movements with clear intentionality. And then it did something that changed everything. Something that proved beyond doubt that I was dealing with intelligence that matched or exceeded human intelligence in ways I couldn't measure but could recognize. It touched my hand. Not aggressively. Not accidentally. Deliberately. Its head moved forward until the skin of its snout made contact with my fingers where they gripped the paddle. The touch lasted perhaps 3 seconds. A moment of physical connection between species that shouldn't have been able to communicate. And in that moment, I felt something. Not words. Not images. But a sense of presence. Of mind meeting mind. Of consciousness acknowledging consciousness. Of intelligence recognizing intelligence across every barrier of biology and evolution and isolation. Then it withdrew. Sank slowly back into the depths, leaving me alone in my kayak with tears streaming down my face, understanding with absolute certainty that I'd just experienced something most humans would never experience, direct communication with non-human intelligence. The creature wasn't just an animal. It was a person. Different from human persons, but a person nonetheless. An individual with thoughts and memories and intentions and perhaps even emotions I could only guess at. And I was the only scientist who knew this. The only one who could testify to what existed in these waters. The only one who understood that the Loch Ness Monster wasn't a mystery to be solved but a being to be recognized and respected and protected. That moment of contact changed my life. Changed my career. Changed everything I thought I knew about consciousness and intelligence and what separates human from non-human minds. Part 2 will reveal what I learned in the months that followed, how the creature taught me to see the world differently, and why I'm finally breaking my silence after 46 years of protecting a secret that the world isn't ready to accept. I spent the rest of that summer on the loch. Every free moment, every evening after teaching, every weekend. I bought my own small boat, learned to navigate by the landmarks the locals used, found the places where the creature appeared most frequently. And slowly, carefully, I built a relationship with something I had no framework for understanding. The creature, I couldn't bring myself to call it the monster anymore, couldn't use a term that implied mindless threat, responded to my presence. Not every time. Not predictably. But often enough that I began to recognize patterns in its behavior that suggested intentionality rather than instinct. It would surface near my boat when I was alone but avoid me when others were present. It would approach more closely when I remained still and silent than when I made noise or sudden movements. It seemed to distinguish between different boats, different people, responding to individuals rather than simply reacting to human presence in general. And most remarkably, it began teaching me. I don't know how else to describe what happened over those months. The creature would surface, would position itself where I could observe clearly, and would demonstrate behaviors that seemed designed to communicate information. It would show me how it fed, not violently like a predator, but with a deliberate selection of fish that suggested preference and choice. It would demonstrate how it moved through the water, the efficiency of its body shape, the grace that came from millions of years of evolution refined to near perfection. Sometimes it would bring things to show me. A rock with unusual markings. A piece of wood carved by water into interesting shapes. Objects that had no obvious utility but that the creature seemed to find aesthetically significant. It was sharing its world with me, showing me what it found beautiful or noteworthy or worth preserving. Alastair watched this process with quiet satisfaction. "It's chosen you," he said one evening when I'd come to his cottage to discuss what I'd been experiencing. "Doesn't happen often. Last person it chose was my father, back in the 1940s. Before that, his grandmother in the 1890s. It selects certain humans, seems to recognize something in them that makes communication possible. What does it want from me? Same thing you want from it. Understanding. Recognition. Proof that it's not alone in being conscious, in being aware, in experiencing the world as more than just stimulus and response. But why me? I'm not special. I'm just a teacher who happened to be in the right place. You're a teacher who looked at it without fear. Who recognized intelligence when you saw it? Who responded with curiosity instead of the need to capture or control? That's rare, Andrew. Rarer than you think. I started keeping detailed notes. Not for publication, I understood that would betray the trust the creature had placed in me, but for my own understanding. Observations of behavior, descriptions of interactions, attempts to decode what the various sounds and gestures might mean. I was conducting the most important research of my life, and I could never share it with another scientist. The isolation of that knowledge was profound. I was witnessing something that would revolutionize biology, psychology, philosophy, any field concerned with consciousness and intelligence. And I had to keep it secret, had to pretend to my colleagues that my summer in Scotland had been pleasant but unremarkable, had to smile and nod when people made jokes about the Loch Ness Monster without revealing that I knew exactly what lived in those waters. In August, something changed. The creature began initiating contact rather than simply responding to my presence. It would surface near my boat and make specific sounds, variations on that low, resonant thrumming that seemed to carry different meanings. Short pulses versus long ones. Single sounds versus sequences. Patterns that suggested a rudimentary language, or at least a system of signals more sophisticated than simple animal calls. I tried to respond in kind, tapping on the hull of my boat in rhythms that mimicked what I'd heard. Creating patterns of my own, simple at first, then growing more complex as I gained confidence. And remarkably, impossibly, the creature responded to my attempts. Would repeat patterns I'd made, would create variations on them, would seem to be testing whether I understood what it was trying to communicate. We developed something that wasn't quite language but was more than mere noise. A system of sounds and rhythms that carried meaning even though I couldn't always decode that meaning. The creature would make a specific pattern, would watch my response, would adjust its next attempt based on whether I seemed to understand. This is crucial. Listen carefully. What I'm describing isn't anthropomorphization or wishful thinking or a scientist seeing patterns where none exist. This was deliberate, intentional communication between two intelligent beings trying to bridge a gap that biology said couldn't be bridged. Subscribe if you understand what that means for our definition of intelligence. Hit that like button if you believe consciousness isn't limited to human brains. Because what happened next proved that the creature wasn't just intelligent, it was trying to teach me something specific. One afternoon in late August, the creature surfaced and made a new sound. Not the thrumming I'd grown familiar with, but something higher pitched, more urgent. It repeated the sound 3 times, then dove and resurfaced 20 meters away, making the same sound again. It was trying to get me to follow. I started my boat's engine and motored toward where it had surfaced. The creature dove again, reappeared farther away, repeated the sound. This pattern continued for perhaps 10 minutes, with the creature leading me across the loch toward a section I'd rarely visited, deeper water near the center, where the tourist boats rarely ventured. Then it stopped and held position, its head above water, making a different sound now. Lower, sustained, almost mournful. I cut the engine and looked around, trying to understand what it wanted me to see. The water was darker here, the depth probably 300 meters or more. The shores were distant in all directions. We were as isolated as it was possible to be on the loch during daylight hours. And then I saw them. Other creatures. 3 more, surfacing simultaneously perhaps 50 meters from my boat. Smaller than the one I'd been interacting with, juveniles, perhaps, or a different age class. They stayed together, their necks intertwined in a way that suggested social bonding rather than accident. The creature beside my boat made another sound, softer, gentler. And the others responded, creating a chorus of vocalizations that was clearly communication. A conversation happening right in front of me, in a language I couldn't understand but could recognize as genuine exchange of information. They were showing me their family, their community, proving that they weren't a single individual but a population, a society, a group of conscious beings living hidden in the depths of the loch. The encounter lasted perhaps 5 minutes. Then, one by one, the other creatures dove and disappeared. The one I'd come to know stayed beside my boat for a moment longer, looking at me with those remarkable eyes, and I understood what it was asking. Do you see now? Do you understand what we are? I see, I said aloud, my voice thick with emotion. I understand. You're not alone. And neither am I. My summer contract ended in September. I was expected to return to Manchester, to my position at the secondary school, to my life as a divorced biology teacher living in a small flat and counting the days until retirement. But how could I return to that after what I'd experienced? How could I teach students about animal behavior and evolutionary biology without being able to tell them about the most remarkable example of both that existed on the planet? I couldn't. So I didn't. I resigned my position, citing personal reasons and a desire for a career change. Used my modest savings to rent a cottage near Fort Augustus on a long-term lease. Took a job teaching part-time at the local school, Jamie School, though he'd moved on to university by then, which gave me enough income to survive while leaving my days free for what had become my life's work. Studying the creatures. Documenting their behavior. Trying to understand the intelligence I'd been privileged to witness. Alistair helped me, sharing knowledge his family had accumulated over generations. The creatures were long-lived, individuals he'd known in his youth were still present 40 years later, showing little sign of aging. They were primarily nocturnal but would sometimes surface during the day in response to specific conditions or stimuli. They had preferred feeding grounds, regular migration patterns within the loch, and what appeared to be territorial behavior that suggested social organization. My father thought there were perhaps 7 or 8 individuals, Alistair told me. Different sizes, different markings, different behaviors. A small population, probably related to each other, possibly the last remnant of something that was once more widespread. And they've survived this long by hiding. By being smart. By learning which humans could be trusted and which couldn't. By recognizing that their survival depended on remaining unproven, remaining doubtful, remaining safely in the realm of legend rather than fact. But that means they understand human society. Understand that we're a threat. Understand the concept of secrecy itself. Which is why I say they're not just intelligent, they're wise. Wisdom takes time to develop. These creatures have had millennia to learn how to survive in a world increasingly dominated by a species that destroys what it doesn't understand. I spent the next year deepening my relationship with the creatures. I'd started thinking of them in plural now, after that day when I'd been shown the family group. They responded to me as an individual, seemed to remember our previous encounters, would sometimes approach me with what I could only interpret as recognition and something close to affection. But they also made clear that there were boundaries. Areas of the loch I shouldn't go. Times when my presence wasn't welcome. Behaviors that would cause them to withdraw. They were teaching me respect as much as I was learning about them, showing me that intelligence included the right to privacy, to autonomy, to spaces that belonged to them and them alone. In October 1979, something changed. The creatures became agitated, surfacing more frequently than usual, making sounds I hadn't heard before, harsh, urgent, almost distressed. For 3 days, this behavior continued, with the primary creature I'd been interacting with repeatedly approaching my boat and making these new vocalizations. Something was wrong. Something had disturbed them or threatened them or changed their environment in a way they found alarming. I found out what on the 4th day when a research vessel appeared on the loch. Not a tourist boat, this was official, equipped with sophisticated sonar and sampling equipment, crewed by scientists and technicians who were clearly conducting serious research. I learned from local contacts that the vessel was part of a renewed scientific effort to document the loch's ecology. Nothing to do with monster hunting, the project leader assured journalists who inquired. Just comprehensive study of the loch's unique ecosystem. Sonar mapping. Water sampling. Documentation of fish populations. But I understood what the creatures had understood. Sonar meant detection. Meant their hideaways would be mapped. Meant the cave systems they used, the deep refuges they'd relied on for generations, would be revealed to humans who would want to explore them further. The research vessel stayed for 2 weeks. During that time, I never saw the creatures surface once. They'd gone deep, had retreated to whatever sanctuaries the sonar couldn't penetrate, had recognized the threat and responded with the caution that had kept them alive this long. When the research vessel finally left, taking its data back to whatever institution had funded the study, the creatures didn't immediately return. I spent days on the loch, hoping for contact, worried that they'd been so disturbed they might not surface again. Finally, after a week of absence, the primary creature appeared near my boat. But it was different now. More cautious. More distant. The trust we'd built over 18 months had been damaged by the presence of the research vessel, by the reminder that humans couldn't all be trusted, that even scientific curiosity posed a threat. It approached close enough for me to see it clearly but didn't make contact. Didn't touch my hand as it had before. Just looked at me with those remarkable eyes, and I understood what it was communicating. This is why we hide. This is why we can't reveal ourselves. This is why even you, who we trusted, represent danger we can never fully escape. I'm crying as I record this, 46 years later, remembering that moment. Remembering the loss I felt when I realized that my very presence, my very humanity, would always be a threat to these beings I'd come to respect and even love. Subscribe if you understand what it means to be trusted by something that has every reason to fear you. Hit that like button if you believe the price of wisdom is often isolation. Share this with people who understand that sometimes protection means distance, even from those we care about. The creature made one final vocalization, soft, almost mournful, then dove and didn't resurface. I sat in my boat until sunset, hoping it would return, hoping we could rebuild what the research vessel had damaged. But I knew, even then, that something had changed irrevocably. The creatures had been reminded of what humans represented. And I had been reminded of what it meant to be trusted with knowledge that could destroy what I most wanted to protect. I saw the creatures sporadically over the next few years. Brief sightings, always at a distance, never with the intimacy we'd shared during that remarkable summer and autumn of 1978. They hadn't abandoned the loch. I knew from Alistair and others in the local community that they were still present, still occasionally revealing themselves to those who knew where and when to look. But they'd withdrawn from me. Had recognized that I represented a bridge between their world and the human world, and that bridge was too dangerous to maintain. I left Scotland in 1982. Took a position teaching biology at the University of Edinburgh, where I could pursue my career while remaining close enough to the loch that I could visit when the longing became too strong. I never returned to field research. Never tried to publish anything about what I'd witnessed. Kept my secret as carefully as the creatures kept theirs. And I built a career on teaching students about consciousness and intelligence in ways informed by what I'd learned but could never directly reference. I taught them to recognize intelligence in unexpected forms. To respect consciousness wherever it appeared. To understand that awareness wasn't an exclusively human quality but something that evolution had created in multiple forms, most of which we'd never recognize because we were looking for the wrong markers. Some of my colleagues thought me eccentric. Too willing to anthropomorphize. Too ready to attribute complex cognition to species that conventional wisdom said were purely instinctual. But my students, some of them, at least, understood. Saw the passion in my teaching. Recognized that I was speaking from experience rather than theory. I never married. Never had children. The creatures had shown me what it meant to recognize consciousness in non-human form, and somehow human relationships seemed diminished by comparison. How could I explain to a partner that I'd once communicated with beings who existed outside human society yet possessed intelligence that might rival our own? How could I be intimate with someone when the most profound intimacy I'd ever experienced had been with a creature most people believed was a hoax? Now I'm dying. The cancer is spreading faster than the doctors expected. I have weeks rather than months. And I've decided that the secret needs to be told, not to prove anything, not to vindicate myself or the creatures, but simply to bear witness. To say, I saw. I experienced. I understood. The creatures at Loch Ness are real. They're intelligent. They're conscious beings with thoughts and memories and social bonds and perhaps even culture. They're not animals in the way we use that word to mean a lesser than human. They're persons. Different kinds of persons, but persons nonetheless. And they've chosen to remain hidden. Chosen to let themselves be dismissed as legend rather than risk what acknowledgement would bring. That choice is itself evidence of the intelligence I'm testifying to, the wisdom to understand that sometimes survival means accepting misunderstanding, means letting yourself be called a hoax rather than becoming a specimen. I'm releasing this testimony knowing it will be dismissed by most who hear it. Knowing I have no proof beyond my word. Knowing that skeptics will attribute my claims to delusion or fraud or the romanticism of a dying man seeking meaning in his final days. But I know what I experienced. I know what I saw in those eyes when the creature looked at me and I looked back. I know what it means to be recognized as conscious by something that isn't human but that shares the fundamental quality that makes consciousness valuable, the ability to experience, to understand, to care about existence itself. This is Dr. Andrew Morgan's final testimony. Recorded in Edinburgh, Scotland, in December 2024. I'm releasing this with no expectations. No demands for belief. No proof beyond my word. But if you're listening, if these words have found you, then consider this: intelligence takes forms we haven't recognized. Consciousness exists in minds we haven't validated. And the world is stranger, richer, more filled with wonder than our scientific frameworks have room for. Subscribe to this channel not to chase legends or hunt monsters, but to remember that awareness isn't exclusive to humanity. That minds exist in forms we might never recognize if we only look for reflections of ourselves. Hit that like button if this testimony made you think differently about what separates human from non-human consciousness. If it made you question whether the boundaries we draw are real or just convenient fictions that help us feel special. Share this with people who understand that sometimes the greatest discoveries are the ones we can never prove. That sometimes the most profound truths are the ones we have to take on faith, not because evidence doesn't exist but because seeking that evidence would destroy what we're trying to understand. I came face to face with the Loch Ness Monster, and I realized it's not just a simple animal. It's a mind, a consciousness, a being that experiences existence in ways I can never fully understand but that I recognize as fundamentally similar to my own experience. It thinks. It remembers. It communicates. It cares about its own survival and the survival of its community. It's intelligent in ways our definitions of intelligence don't accommodate. But intelligence it is. Undeniable. Profound. Worthy of respect rather than capture. Worthy of protection rather than proof. The creatures are real. They're conscious. And they've trusted a handful of humans across generations to keep their secret. I've kept that secret for 46 years. Now, as I die, I'm breaking it, not to expose them but to honor them. To say that they existed, that they mattered, that they showed one skeptical scientist what it means to recognize consciousness in unexpected forms. Thank you for listening. Thank you for considering. Thank you for at least entertaining the possibility that I'm telling the truth. Face to face with the Loch Ness Monster, I realized it's not just a simple animal. It's so much more than that. And so are we, when we open ourselves to recognizing intelligence wherever it appears. Dr. Andrew Morgan died on January 22, 2025, at the age of 80. This recording was found on his computer along with extensive notes about consciousness, intelligence, and interspecies communication. The notes contained no photographs, no physical evidence, no proof beyond his detailed observations and his unwavering insistence that what he'd experienced was real. In his will, he left his estate to conservation organizations working to protect Loch Ness and its ecosystem. And he left this final note. To whoever finds this, I've told the truth as best I could. Whether you believe it is your choice. But if you visit Loch Ness, if you stand on its shores and look across the dark water, remember that consciousness might be looking back. Not human consciousness, but consciousness nonetheless. Respect it. Protect it. And perhaps, if you're very lucky and very open, you might be chosen, as I was, to witness intelligence that exists outside our species, outside our frameworks, outside everything we thought we knew about what makes a mind. The creatures have not been seen by any credible witness since Andrew Morgan's last documented sighting in 1982. Whether they're still there, watching and waiting, choosing to remain hidden, or whether they've gone somewhere even deeper, somewhere beyond our ability to detect them, remains, as always, a mystery. But Dr. Morgan believed they were still there, still conscious, still intelligent, still worthy of wonder. And perhaps that belief, more than any proof, is what truly matters.